I want to welcome everybody to our first Hangar Class Live. This is an hour of education for pilots and plane owners. My name is Diana Jones. I am the owner of Cessna Owner Organization and Piper Owner Society. A recording of this webinar will be available tomorrow. We will send out an email to all of those who have registered, and it will provide you with a link so that you can view it or download. For your information, we have turned off the Q&A section of this webinar as we received a lot of questions. Our speakers today took the time to sift through them and put as many questions together as they could. Their contact information will be available at the end of this webinar if your question did not get answered. This webinar will go for 1 hour. We want to make sure that we are cognizant of your time. We are going to start. This is the first of a 4-part series on electronic ignition. This is by Electroair for general aviation aircraft. And then we have 4 webinars in the series. So today we'll be discussing myths, misconceptions, and what matters. We want you to save the dates for the remaining 3 parts. Next one is June 25th, how to evaluate electronic ignition for your aircraft. Then we have one on September 17th, December 10th. We'll give you information on how to sign up for those at the end of this webinar. Go ahead, Bill.
All right. Thanks, Diana. I'm Bill Hahn. I'm the advertising sales executive for JP Media, which is Piper Owner Society and Cessna Owner Organization. Just want to let you know who's here today and really appreciate your attendance. Believe it or not, those numbers on that screen are a little bit off. We are at nearly 700 registered aircraft owners for this session. It was a pretty even mix between 50-50, even though it says 52-48, between those that are here live and those that just wanted to receive the recording. As Diana says, everybody that has signed up will receive the recording. And out of those that had registered, 54% are Cessna owners, 43% are Piper owners, and 9% other aircraft. 52% of you are currently flying Magnetos only. 29% are planning to install electronic ignition, and 18% are already flying electronic ignition. As Diana said, we had 258 owners that submitted more than 350 technical questions, and that helped shape today's presentation. So with that, it's been my honor and distinct pleasure to get to know these 2 gentlemen over the last several months. So your presenters today are Mr. Michael Kobylik, who is president and owner of Electroair Ignition Systems, a Michigan-based company that designs and produces electronic ignition systems for general aviation piston aircraft. He and his partner acquired Electroair in 2005 and have since guided the company through development and certification of electronic ignition solutions used on a wide range of certified and experimental aircraft. Under his leadership, Electroair has earned recognition within the aviation community for advancing ignition technology and partnerships with organizations such as the Experimental Aircraft Association. Michael is active in industry events, sharing technical insights with pilots and maintenance professionals on the benefits of modern ignition systems. Mr. Darrell Pool is the owner of Smooth Power LLC, which served as the master distributor for Electroair for the past 10 years. Late last year, Darrell purchased half of Electroair and is now Michael's partner in this company as well. Darrell will continue to operate Smooth Power LLC as a distributor for Hartzell Top Prop STC sales. Prior to Darrell's career with Electroair, he spent 35 years in the aircraft propeller repair and overhaul business, with the last 12 of those years owning his own shop. Darrell and his wife Rhonda are also in a partnership in their local area, where they have 8 leaseback aircraft operating in a local aero club. Darrell now has a combined 46 years in general aviation. Aviation isn't just Darrell's profession, it's a lifelong passion. And it's my privilege to turn this over to Mr. Michael Kobylik.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Diana. Before we talk about ignition systems, we really need to talk about combustion and the different components that make up combustion. Combustion requires 3 things. First, it requires fuel, 100 low lead in this case. It requires air, which is measured by manifold. We measure it as manifold absolute air pressure, commonly referred to as MAP. That gives us a very good idea of the amount of air inside of the combustion chamber. Then the third thing we need for combustion is heat, or an ignition source, also known as spark, obviously. Fuel plus air plus ignition is what leads us to combustion. The pressures that occur from combustion is what drives the engine. So as that fuel air mixture comes into the combustion chamber, is compressed, and then we ignite it with a spark, the combustion event that takes place begins to unleash gases and pressure. We want the peak pressure as a result of combustion to occur at 16 degrees after top dead center. This is a mathematical this comes from a mathematical equation and is true for all what we call Otto cycle or gasoline powered engines. That peak pressure point occurring at 16 degrees after top dead center maximizes the amount of force we can apply to the piston, giving us the best amount of power on the piston to drive the crank and thereby creating work. What's the problem that's faced by aircraft engines today? Well, the main problem that we see in aircraft engines today, as far as delivering or maximizing the amount of power output, are a weak ignition system. And the weak ignition system, our conventional magnetos, are comprised of or deliver weak spark energy, and they have no spark control at all. So we have the fuel, controlled by the pilot, the air, which is really controlled by the environment. It's out of our control. If we think about it, as we're down at sea level, air has a certain density. As we climb up in altitude, the air thins out and is less dense, obviously. Ignition, from the perspective of traditional magnetos, are low energy, fixed timing devices. Once they're installed in the engine, we really have no control over them at all. So if we combine 100 low lead fuel with air and old style magnetos, that leads us to poor combustion inside of the engine. We're not doing as well as we could be. Poor combustion leads to poor performance. Let's talk about some of the common misperceptions of aircraft ignition systems, regardless of how they operate today, magnetos or electronic ignitions. Misconception number one is that spark energy doesn't matter. Absolutely not true. Spark energy is critical to being able to start the combustion event and get it going so that we end up with the peak pressure point occurring at 16 degrees after top dead center. Aircraft engines have inherently large combustion chambers. A weak spark will not get that combustion event going well enough, especially at altitude, for that peak pressure to develop in time. Weak spark energy can also lead to detonation. Detonation is defined as the unintended burning of fuel and air after top dead center, generally down further in the power stroke. What happens in a detonation event is you'll have localized hot spots on the top of the piston because of incomplete combustion, and it'll begin to damage the piston. Weak spark energy, quite frankly, is the reason we have two magnetos in the first place. I ask this question all the time, which at different seminars. Does anybody know why we have two magnetos? And the very common answer is, well, we have two magnetos because we need to have redundancy. In case one fails, we have the backup. That's actually not true. That development came later. If we wind the clock back to the 1930s, where we have this just incredible advancement in propulsion technology, if you think of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the V12, they had enormous combustion chambers. A Merlin can develop manifold pressures upwards of 60 inches of manifold. The individual magnetos of the time and the spark energy that was available just did not have enough oomph, if you will, to get that fuel air mixture going and combusting such that it would develop peak energy or peak pressure at 16 degrees after top dead center. So the engineering solution was to take one spark plug and divide the job up between two, hence two magnetos. Later, we end up with regulatory recommendations or CAR 3. If you look at the original reg, it says that you have two ignition systems, one to serve as one to serve as a primary ignition and one to serve as a backup. Think of it another way as lighting off a campfire. If you start a campfire with a match, it's certainly going to burn, but it's going to take some time for that whole flame front to progress through the fuel, the wood that you've set there. If you start the campfire with a blowtorch, it's going to get going right now. Now you get yourself a fire very quickly. Same concept in engines. Misconception number 2, ignition timing doesn't matter. Again, not true. As altitude changes, so does the amount of air available for combustion. The higher the altitude, the thinner the air in the combustion chamber. If we think about it in the perspective of when we're down at sea level and we're at wide open throttle and the manifold pressures are very high, those fuel air molecules are packed very close together. They combust at a certain rate. As we go up in altitude and the air gets thinner, the distance between the fuel air molecules gets greater. It takes longer for that fuel air mixture charge to combust and develop peak pressure. This is why we need to adjust timing, is we've got to allow for, if our goal is always, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, our goal is always here to develop peak pressure as a result of combustion at that magical 16 degrees after top dead center. As we go up in altitude, the air gets thinner. We need to give the time for that combustion event enough time to burn so that that peak pressure point is occurring at 16 degrees after top dead center versus further and further down the throat of the piston. Advancing timing also helps prevent detonation when the manifold pressures are very low. Again, remember, detonation is the unintended burning of fuel and air at some point well after top dead center and certainly after the peak pressure point of 16 degrees. Well, again, if we're advancing the timing, we're now giving that fuel air mixture the amount of time it needs to combust such that that peak pressure is made at 16 degrees after top dead center. Misconception number 3, CHTs will rise too much with electronic ignition systems. Not true. A properly configured electronic ignition system may cause the CHTs to rise slightly. Our guideline for the Electroair systems is no more of a rise of 20 to 30 degrees above what you normally see. The reason that the CHTs are going to rise is, again, because we have a much higher energy spark and we're varying the timing. We're getting the combustion to happen at the point that we want. We're having that combustion happen inside of the combustion chamber. An excessive CHT rise caused by an electronic ignition system is generally because of an incorrectly installed component, causing, again, typically the ignition timing itself to be advanced too far for a given manifold pressure. In the case of the Electroair system, speaking of that, we will not advance timing above 24 inches of manifold pressure. So any timing advance that occurs with our system is happening below 24 inches of manifold pressure. There's a lot of mythology in engines about CHTs in engines and where they need to be. If they're too hot, there's potential for damage, certainly, and as a result of barrel head separation. This is why CHT limits are established in the first place. But there's a problem on the other end of the spectrum, too. If they're too cold, then the engine will not lead scavenge properly, and you'll have excessive lead buildup and probably foul spark plugs. I promise you, we do an entire webinar on CHTs and engines. The bottom line, electronic ignitions themselves are not designed to cause excessive CHTs. We couldn't get approved if we were. Beware of the internet claims, and when you see them, if you have questions, by all means, feel free to ask us. The promise of an electronic ignition system is to deliver high performance to these engines and to bring our engines up performing better. A lot of this is based on the prejudice that we have gained through our experience in the automotive world. With the introduction of high-energy electronic ignition systems in the late 80s and 90s in computer-controlled engine devices, we saw power outputs really get much better in smaller engines compared to their bigger brothers. Think about the 350 V8 with the four-barrel carburetor back in the 70s or 80s. That engine developed all kinds of horsepower because we were able to dump a lot of fuel through that motor. As you come into the late 80s and early 90s, General Motors developed a quad 4 that would put out the same amount of torque as that 350 V8. A lot of this has to do with high energy ignition systems. We want our airplane to go from this to this. In order to do that, high performance ignition systems need two things, two key components. They need high energy output coils. The Electroair system coil puts out about 70,000 volts through 20 degrees of crank rotation. A Magneto typically puts out at cruise about 12,000 volts through 3 to 5 degrees of crank rotation. High performance ignition systems also need the ability to change timing and to control that spark event and to place the spark event at the point we want, again, so that peak pressure as a result of combustion occurs at about 16 degrees after top dead center. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's an important point. The myth, electronic ignitions are created equal. They are not. In a lot of cases, electronic ignitions it depends a lot on what their engineering goals were. In the case of the Electroair system, our goal was not only to create an electronic ignition system, but a high performance modification to the engine so that we could begin to experience these performance gains. Electroair offers the only FAA approved ignition system that has both high energy ignition system and coupled with variable timing. So when we're doing this or this, we can see this. Very typically, fuel savings in a four-cylinder engine, about 1 gallon per hour. In a six-cylinder engine, we see fuel savings typically of 1.5 gallons to 2 gallons per hour. Now, that's for normally aspirated engines. Turbocharged guys out there are probably asking, well, what about me? Turbocharged applications, we don't see as big of a gain in fuel savings, although we do see some. Very common to see 1 gallon per hour in fuel savings in a turbocharged engine. But more importantly, the feedback that we've got is the ability to lean at much higher manifold pressures and to lean deeper at those higher manifold pressures. The other value is less high altitude misses. Airspeed increases. This is very common. We see this on airplanes that are designed to be high performance in the first place. Piper Comanches, for example, when they install an Electroair system, it's not uncommon that if they leave the fuel where they were at before, for what they flight planned, they would see an increase in airspeed of anywhere between 5 to 7 knots. Now, I will say it's not a guarantee for all airframes for sure. You want an airframe that's designed to be aerodynamically slippery. If we think of another airframe, one of my personal favorites, frankly, is Cessna 185. It's designed to be a truck. It's not designed to be aerodynamic, but it's designed to be a hauler and carry stuff and get you places. Those airspeed increases are not there, but the fuel economy savings are there. Smoother engine operation. By being able to tune that ignition system and develop that peak pressure again more consistently at 16 degrees after top dead center, the engine's going to run butter smooth. Other things that we see, lower exhaust gas temperatures. That comes from getting the combustion event started more completely inside of the combustion chamber. So what's going out the tailpipe are spent gases and not burning plasma. Quite often what wears on exhaust valves are the burning fuel plasmas coming across the valve seats and eroding those seats. By doing a better job of having combustion done inside of the combustion chamber, what's going out the exhaust valves are spent gases. Better combustion also leads to less blow-by. Blow-by are the contaminants that get past the piston rings and end up in our oil pan. And that's what wears out oil faster. Better combustion will undoubtedly leads to less blow-by. Mentioned this before, better leaning at high altitude. Again, as we get up at altitude, those fuel air molecules get further and further apart. We're leaning the fuel air mixture to be able to get the most amount of power out of that. The high energy ignition system, the Electroair system, is able to light off very, very lean fuel air mixtures. Kind of an anecdotal story. We had a customer running, took a flight from Atlanta, Georgia down to Florida, and he got to altitude, 8,000 feet, I think is what it was. Everything was trimmed and moving smoothly. He wanted to see how far he could lean the engine to. He had a vernier control. His wife was sitting in the right seat. She was comfortably reading a book, enjoying the trip. He starts leaning out the mixture and keeps going and going and going. And he pulled the mixture all the way out to the mixture stop, and the engine just went, "Zzz." And he went, "Oh, that's interesting." Dials the mixture back in. The engine comes right back to power. Wife looks at him and says, "What'd you do?" He said, "Well, I was just testing to see how lean I could go with the engine." "Don't ever do that again," she said. The high energy ignition system has the ability to lean very, very lean fuel air mixtures and light off just about anything you put in front of our spark plugs. High altitude misses are also gone. I mentioned that before. Air is a resistor. When we're down low at sea level and air is very dense, electricity has a difficult time moving through it. As we get up in altitude and air thins out, the resistance that that air provides starts to diminish and go away. High altitude misses are occurring inside of the distributor of your magneto, and that's because the air is thin. And as the wiper is moving around the magneto, if you will, there's the potential for that energy, instead of going to the post that's leading out to the spark plug, it'll arc to some of the other posts because all of those posts are grounded. The spark plugs are all grounded to the engine. And that's where you get the snap or the miss occurring as a result of that energy arcing inside of the cap of the distributor. Reduce maintenance. The Electroair system does not have any required repetitive maintenance during the life of the engine. In other words, there's no 500-hour inspections. There's no mechanical points that need to be adjusted. There's no things that need to be tweaked or changed as the engine is operating. We do recommend that the mag timing housings or the trigger mechanisms, which are the mechanical rotating pieces of the ignition system, get replaced at about 2,500 hours. All of the other components are replaced on condition. Spark plug wires are separate from that. We do recommend a replacement interval for that. But in the comparison between the magneto and the Electroair system, there are virtually no maintenance things that have to be done. High energy, variably timed ignition systems, like the Electroair system, unleashes the power in your engine. By providing a tuned ignition system, you're going to improve the horsepower of your engine and get closer to what it's supposed to be. Now, let me clarify that. We are not increasing the horsepower of your engine. So your 150 horse Lycoming engine is still a 150 horse Lycoming engine. But if we think about how that 150 horse number is derived, it actually comes out of a math equation that looks at the volume, the combustion chamber volume, the throw of the piston, and a whole variety of other variables that when you get to the equal sign, it equals 150 horse. What happens with these engines is as you start putting accessories on the aircraft, or on the engine rather, you now start pulling the actual output of that engine down. Magnetos by themselves can rob you of about anywhere from 1 to 2 horsepower, and you've got two of them on the airplane. So by putting an Electroair system on there, we remove those devices that are robbing us of horsepower, and we add components that aren't dragging on the engine. So that's one way we get additional horsepower. And then the other way simply is by better combustion. That's the biggest way of doing it. Doing a better job of combusting or burning fuel and air inside of the combustion chamber allows for more power, more work, more torque out at the prop. Electroair, as Bill had mentioned, we've been around for a while. We received our first approval in 2011 on four-cylinder systems. We have systems approved for four-cylinder and six-cylinder engines, Lycoming and Continentals. I think just about every variety that it's out there, with few exceptions. We are approved for single magneto replacements and replacements of both magnetos as well. Again, typically we see a 10 to 15% gain in fuel economy, 1% or a gallon per hour for four-cylinder, gallon and a half, 2 gallons per hour for six-cylinder, and increased airspeed in many applications. We are also approved to replace the Bendix single drive dual magneto. If you're running with a Cessna 172N or a Cardinal in the four-cylinder world, this would be the kit that you would use. We also have them available for six-cylinder dual mag replacements, which would be in the Saratogas, Lances, and that sort of thing. This is a six-cylinder system that's typical for a Continental six-cylinder engine, the 470, the 520s, and the 550s, and so on. Question we get often, and I know this is going to be the topic of another webinar or a future webinar, but should you use a dual system? What's the difference between a single and a dual system? Where's the benefit? What's the gain? And the way we answer that question, and I'll be brief on this one, is if you think of a scale from 0 to 100, 0 being two magnetos and 100 being two Electroair systems, you get about 85% of the way there with the first Electroair system. You get what I call the wow effect, the big pickup in the fuel economy, the smoother running engine, the easier hot starts. All of that happens with the first Electroair system. The second system where it's going to benefit you is if you're flying high altitude. And by high altitude, I mean 15,000 feet and above. Magnetos just do not do well up there because the air is so thin. Again, we don't have a distributor. Our spark energy is firing directly into the spark plugs themselves. The benefit, the marginal benefit, though, again, 0 to 85% with the first one, is not, we're not going to double your fuel savings or anything like that with the second electronic ignition system. You're going to get benefit by not having the weak spark from the magneto. And the other benefit, which is becoming more and more of an issue these days, is you won't have to deal with the maintenance on that second magneto. We have lots of customers now that are converting from a single Electroair to a single Electroair, single magneto to dual Electroair systems just to get away from the maintenance on the magneto. We also, as a general practice, when we sell these systems and you begin asking us questions, we start to evaluate your mission profile, what your goals are, and that sort of thing. And most of the time, we're promoting just a single system. Now, for those customers or for those operators that have the Bendix single drive dual magneto applications, you have to go with dual Electroair systems. But there are lots of benefits to that. The next steps that you have, now that you've gotten some information about electronic ignitions and about Electroair systems, the next natural questions are, what are the next steps that you should do? First one is research compatibility with your specific engine and your airframe. We list all of our technical documents on our website, including the approved model lists for the airframes, for the engines, all of that sort of thing. If there's something there that you don't see or that you're confused, that doesn't make sense, email us and let us know. For the airframes that aren't there, we've got ways of being able to get you in touch with correct people to get field approvals done if necessary. Second thing I would really recommend you do, discuss these kinds of upgrades with your maintenance professional in your maintenance shop. They're the ones that are going to be installing it, presumably. If they have questions, I know there's, again, we touched upon the mythology about CHTs. I think there's a lot of mythology out there about electronic ignitions and a lot of preconceived notions. Have your technician call us and we'll be happy to walk them through all of the theory, the science, and the real world experience that we have. If they're interested too, we have been building out installation centers throughout the country, and we have a training session. It's about a 3-hour training session oriented towards maintenance professionals that really carries you through a lot of heavy detail along with this. And then finally, the other thing, obviously, is when you're evaluating an upgrade like this, evaluate it alongside other upgrades that you're doing. This is really good to do at an engine change. It's also a very practical thing to do during an annual. All of those things. We have lots of installation pictures too that we can share with you, and happy to do it. For additional information, we're going to head into our question and answer session. It's kind of a summary of the questions that you guys did, but certainly reach out to us with specific questions, either through our website or at sales@electroair.net. We'll be happy to answer anything we can for you. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Bill and Diana, and we can start asking questions.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate all of the expert advice that you provided today. And I know we're looking forward to hearing what Darrell has to say with some of the questions and answers. But before we do get into the Q&A, just wanted to call your attention. Registration will be open for part 2, which is how to evaluate electronic ignition for your aircraft. Which is a practical framework owners can use to determine whether electronic ignition makes sense for their specific aircraft, engine, mission profile, and maintenance reality, all centered on decision making rather than brand claims. So a lot of those questions that we received, the very specific ones, were for those aircrafts. Those will come up within the next session then. And that'll be on Thursday, June 25th from noon until 1 Central Time. So after this webinar, please go to the website, cessnaowner.org and piperowner.org/webinars. Sign up for that as well. And while you're there, we just ask that you sign up for membership too if you appreciate what we do. And with all that, then, let me just turn it over to Diana.
Thank you so much, Bill. Very grateful. At this time, we're going to start with our question and answer. We had over, again, 350 technical questions. Through the registration process, the questions were compiled by Mike and Darrell in order to answer the most questions today. So if you do have a question that did not get answered today, please use the contact information that is located here. And you can email or call or text, I think, not call, right? Text, and they'll be able to get back to you. So here's our first question. Is Electroair electronic ignition actually better than Magnetos?
Uh, Thank you, Diana, and thank everybody for joining us today. This is an awesome opportunity for us to speak directly with you guys and tell our story. To Diana's question, is the Electroair ignition system better than a Magneto? Yeah, by leaps and bounds. Magnetos have served us well, been around a long time, basically started out life in 1893, and they are a mechanical device. And like Mike said, they produce a very weak, short duration spark, which is why we need 2 of them on our aircraft engines. You always got to keep in mind on these aircraft engines, we're dealing with massive combustion chambers. For example, my airplanes, which I have Cessna 172s, Piper Archer 2s, they've all got O360 engines in them. That's a 4-cylinder engine with 360 cubic inches. So it's a massive combustion chamber. And it takes a lot of energy to complete the burn or the combustion of the fuel in these cylinders. Magnetos can get it done, but it actually, like Mike said, takes 2 of them to really get it done. With the Electroair system, people have found that this has actually happened. They've been, cross-country flights. They'll lose a Magneto, the one Magneto that they have remaining, and they don't even know it. The engines just keep purring right along. And it's just a testament to how powerful our system is and what a great job it does of getting these fuel air mixtures completely burned in the cylinder and used for work. And Mike's magic number of 16 degrees after top dead center, that's well documented. That's been preached to me as I've been down this path of learning more about engines. Like Bill mentioned earlier, I actually am a propeller guy. Still keep my nose into some of that as well. But back to the question, yes, the Magnetos are a mechanical device, low energy, weak spark. Electroair is going to do a much better job of it. The fixed timing is a big deal. Not as big a deal with turbocharged applications. Mike touched on that briefly. The turbocharged applications, the whole reason for a turbocharger is to compensate for the problem of losing that air pressure in the cylinder at altitude. And that's when we get that separation of the fuel and air molecules, and it takes longer for that mixture to burn. So a turbocharger, all it's doing is cramming more air in there and bringing them back together so that process of burning the fuel and air speeds back up, and we get that peak pressure back in that range that we want to see it at. So with turbocharged engines, the timing advance is not in fact, it's not even going to be there in cruise level flight. But like Mike said, it just does a much better job of being able to light off these fuel air mixtures, and especially at higher manifold pressures. Mike, unless you've got anything else to add on that, as far as our systems compared to the Magnetos.
I actually have one thing I would add on to that. It's an example, which is during an ignition check, so before we take off, we get to the end of the runway, we run the engine up 1800 RPM or so, and traditionally we do a mag check. Now with Electroair, we call them ignition checks. But you're looking for two things when you're doing a mag check. You're looking to make sure, first of all, both mags are running, but you're also taking note of the RPM drop that's happening when you shut one mag off versus the other. The fact that there's an RPM drop there already tells you that one magneto alone is not enough energy to light off that fuel air mixture charge properly, because if it was, the RPM wouldn't change at all, right? When you have an Electroair system installed and now you do the ignition check, when you shut off the Electroair system, you'll see your typical RPM drop on the Magneto, 75, 100, 120 RPM. In fact, it may be a little bit larger than what you had before, because again, to get to 1800 RPM to pick our run-up number, it takes less fuel to get to 1800 RPM. So when you run on a single magneto alone, less fuel, you're going to have an even larger RPM drop. Go back to both, and then when you shut the Electroair system off, it is very typical and very common not to see any RPM drop at all when you're running on just the Electroair system. And that's an indication of the high energy ignition system being able to light off that fuel air mixture charge properly, such that peak pressure occurs at 16 degrees after top dead center. Everybody's going to be saying that for the rest of the day. But I wanted to add that in, Darrell. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And it's probably a really good time for me to talk about a story that you told at Oshkosh. This has been a few years back, that it really turned the light switch on for me. I think you were given, I can't remember if we were in the booth or giving a presentation, and it doesn't really matter. And you and I have actually used this since then when we're giving some smaller group presentations where I pretend like I'm the spark plug and all that fun stuff. But Mike was talking about the combustion event and how it relates to the spark plug itself. He started talking about fuel and air and what's going on inside the cylinder. And so, you know, I've been tinkering with engines since I was 5 years old. My grandfather, retired Air Force guy, and literally had a wrench in my hand instead of a popsicle. But Mike made mention of when the intake valve of a cylinder opens, the fuel and air is being sucked into the engine by the piston going down. There's a vacuum there, and that's just a natural function. But the other natural function that occurs is that fuel and air is entering the cylinder, it's spinning. There's tornadic action created. So you've got a spark plug sitting here waiting to fire. That piston starts coming back up and starts compressing that fuel and air, and it starts igniting. In our case, for a very powerful charge, a big wide gap on the electrodes, we're double the standard gap of a standard aircraft plug. The fuel that's actually going to get ignited by the ignition event is the fuel and air that is passing through and in close proximity to the electrodes. So that's where that high energy, that long duration spark really matters. So the more what it's doing, it's lighting more of it's starting it's lighting is the right word to use. It's lighting that fuel and air, but a lot more of it than what a magneto can do. So now you've got all this flame already going. Now that you've got all that going, it's going to propagate much faster throughout this massive combustion chamber and complete the burn. I get the question a lot when I'm talking to customers, well, do I just turn the magneto off and just run on the Electroair system? No, you could. The engine's going to perform just fine. But we really want that magneto to stay in the on position. It's still adding a little bit to the combustion event, not much. But we want to make sure those spark plugs stay clean, just in the event that you lost electrical. At some point, if you do lose your electrical system, once the battery drains below a certain voltage, the Electroair system is going to fall off. Chances are you're going to be on the ground before that ever happens. I was in a Cessna 180 doing some tests here a few years ago on an ignition system that had been installed by another company. They had made some mistakes. We corrected the mistakes. I went and flew with the individual, and we were up about 9,000 feet. We were on our way to 11. The guy used to fly over the mountains quite a bit and wanted to test it at that altitude. 9,000 feet, we lost the alternator. I told him, this level off, cycled a couple of times to see if we can get it back. Well, it didn't come back. First thing he asked me, he said, "We turn the Electroair system off." And I said, "I prefer you don't. You load shed some other items. Let's go ahead and keep the ignition running." He started descending, and I'm in the Houston area, so I said, you really need to get this thing down. We're going to bust into Class B here in a minute. We're going to be in trouble. Long story short, safe landing, no problems. The ignition system kept operating, but it's just a testament. Our ignition systems, it's pretty amazing to me. They draw such a small amount of amperage. A 6-cylinder system on a 12-volt aircraft is just over an amp. That's the beauty of this large inductive coil that we use. It takes a small amount of amperage and blows it up into voltage. I think we've kind of beat that question to death. We can probably move on if you want to.
Sure. We'll get to question number 2. So how does the maintenance differ from traditional magnetos and the Electroair ignition?
Maintenance is night and day different. And that's one of the reasons that several of our previous customers that were running single systems have opted to go ahead and add a second system. Keep in mind, we are not self-generating for power. So to use our dual systems, you have to have some form of backup power. The most common being the TCW technology standby or backup battery system. You can also use backup alternators as well. But the Electroair system, and Mike touched on this a little bit earlier in the presentation, really, once you put it on your aircraft, it's there for the duration. The maintenance is minimal. Mag timing housings, which are the only rotating component of the system, per the ICA, is a 2,500 hour item. Currently, at 2,500 hours, if you choose to follow the ICAs, we replace it with a new one. Hopefully in the future, well, not even hopefully, we will get there. We will have exchange units available to replace those when they reach those kind of hours. The only other item is spark plug wires. It's a 5-year, 1,000-hour recommended again by the ICA. And I do recommend people pay fairly close attention to that. It's a lot of energy, 70,000 volts, and these wires take a pounding. It's a very good wire. It's an 8.5 millimeter, what we call a spiral core wire. That's designed to handle this type of voltage. Actually, the U.S. Navy uses this wire in a lot of their applications. That's about it on the maintenance side of things. Again, no 500-hour inspections required like a Magneto. Your spark plug maintenance is going to be the same as if it. And what you'll find on spark plugs, and this is a function of what we call our wasted spark that occurs during the exhaust stroke. When one of our coils fires, it's firing 2 cylinders. One's going to be on the compression stroke. One's going to be on the exhaust stroke. That exhaust stroke spark is called a wasted spark. So you've got an empty cylinder, no pressure, 70,000 volts hitting the electrodes. That's actually going to zap off or burn off contaminants from the previous combustion event. So spark plugs stay much cleaner, which is why on installing a single Electroair system, we highly recommend that you put the Magneto in the top position and put your Electroair plugs in the bottom position. And it's just a function of gravity. Your bottom plugs are going to tend to foul sooner. You actually, every time you fly the airplane, just like if you have 2 Magnetos, you're going to be testing this system every time you fly. The ignition check is the same, except, of course, we hope that you use our ignition switch panels. They're much better than rotary key switches. It's actually turning our system on and off. But you're going to turn off the Electroair system. You're going to see a traditional, maybe a little bit higher mag drop than you did before. Turn the Electroair system back on, let the engine recover, turn off the Magneto, and you're not going to see much of a drop at all, provided it's been installed correctly. It's at that time, though, if you do see that higher than normal drop on the Electroair system, probably ought to abort, let a mechanic take a look at it and see what's going on.
All right, number 3. How does the Electroair system affect CHTs?
Well, the reason, knowing full well that this was discussed in the presentation itself, and a lot of this stuff was, but some of it's worth revisiting. It is because I spend my day talking to potential customers, and this is a question that comes up a lot because apparently it gets discussed out in the aviation world a lot. yes, we fully expect an increase in CHT. And it's purely a function of doing more work in the cylinder than what magnetos are capable of doing. Excuse me. Conversely, you're going to see a pretty radical drop in EGT, which is actually the one that we need to focus on. CHTs are important, yes. I've had many conversations with some very smart people, engine guys that have been doing this stuff for many, many years. I won't name drop here because I didn't ask permission, but take my word for it, these guys know what the heck they're doing. 400 degrees does not bother them. And it's not uncommon, especially down here in Texas in the summertime, to see some over 400-degree temps in the climb. Once you level out, they would much rather see those temperatures come down. Their sweet spot, and this is true of several engine engineers I've talked to, is about 360 degrees to right at 380. Somewhere in that range for cruise operations is what they really like to see. A lot of people freak out at that. That's way too hot. No, it's not. Conversely, I see a lot of guys make the mistake of trying to keep their CHTs down around 300. Anytime you get below 350 degrees, now it's cool enough that you're inviting the opportunity for particulates in the gases to solidify and attach themselves. Once we get, if we keep our operations between that sweet spot at 360, 380, or maybe even a little bit warmer, everything's going to stay in a gaseous state and it's going to go ahead and evacuate the cylinder. It's going to keep everything nice and clean. It's one of the things that Mike touched on was the fact that the Electroair systems actually do a really good job of scavenging lead. We learned really early on with our dual systems, and this is in particular on the Cessna 182 RGs that are a carbureted engine, that they had really no capability of running them lean. Those higher time engines had a tremendous amount of lead buildup. And with our dual system, it scavenges out the lead really, really quickly to the point that it will foul plugs. So when we run into those situations, we highly recommend that a bore scope inspection be performed just to see how bad the lead buildup is. There's actually an old Lycoming service instruction that shows you how to build a blasting gun and clean these cylinders out using a certain grit of walnut shell. Sounds crazy, but we've got guys that have done it and it works really well. So that's something to consider. Bring me back on track. What were we talking? What was the question again?
How does the
Well,
Electroair system affect CHTs? Mike?
Oh, okay, CHTs. Mike, you sounded like you wanted to add something.
Well, what I was going to comment on was whenever, and I'm going to comment it on from, I guess, an engineering perspective. If engineering goals are always looking at a bell curve, right? And we want to be right at the top of the bell curve. And if you think of a XY axis of CHTs are on the X axis and performance is on the Y axis, there's a peak point on that bell curve that gives us the best performance for a given CHT range. And you touched upon it very well. Anywhere between that 360 and 380 degrees is really good. If we get too hot, then we're dropping off performance. If we get too cold, we're dropping off performance. Those are absolutely true. The other thing that we have found over the course of time after adding these systems onto aircraft, and in a very generic sense, the Electroair system, well, let me back into it this way. One of the weakest links, if not the weakest link in these aircraft engines, are the magnetos. They are, again, as we've spoke about, a low energy fixed timing device. They're a weak link when we're thinking about the propulsion system in general. You remove the weakest link, what do? You expose the next weak link in the system. And part of the cooling system on these aircraft is baffling. One of the things that we have seen time and time again is with the Electroair system goes on and the CHTs get a little bit higher than what we may be comfortable with. Right away, we look at timing and make sure that the system has been installed correctly. But then it's a very natural occurrence to go look at the baffling of the aircraft and to make sure all of the little pinholes and gaps and things of the rubber baffling are done correctly. Darrell, I've lost track of how many times I've seen baffling when you see it pulled up, it's this big wave on the silicone baffles on the inside. Well, those waves are spots where air can leak out. And instead of that air going through the engine compartment over the cylinders and cooling the cylinders, it's escaping out the sides and not being used to cool the cylinders. So the CHT question can sometimes become a maintenance question and exposing a weak component of the whole engine setup, meaning the baffles. You got to take care of them. You've got to maintain the engine baffles. This would be true whether you're running an Electroair system or not. I would strongly encourage you to look at your baffling on the airplane as well.
Great point, Mike, and you're spot on. Yeah, see it all the time. A lot of this baffling is original to the airplane, and the airplane's my age, which is old. So it needs to be replaced. But one more point that I want to quickly make when we're talking about CHTs, because it's really, to me, for my own aircraft, that the other side of the equation, the EGTs, the exhaust gas temperatures, that's where we really can tell what's going on inside the cylinder. Are we getting all that fuel completely used in the cylinder, or is there a certain percentage of it still burning, still in the plasma state when that exhaust valve opens? If you've got EGTs up in over 1500, close to 1600 degrees, you've got a lot of fuel still burning, and it's burning in the exhaust. Number one, it's not doing anything for you as far as performance, as far as work, but more importantly, that's what burns up exhaust valves. That's what that burns up the seats, and it also wears out the exhaust valve guides. We've actually, and if anybody's interested, just shoot me a text or an email, and I can send you the data that was collected by one of our installation centers. They looked at three, basically the same airplanes that were set up differently as far as ignition systems and exhaust systems, and what they were looking at was exhaust valve guide wear. And just the real quick conclusion of the data, the airplane that did have the Electroair system installed had the least amount of exhaust guide valve wear. And it's just a function of getting those temperatures off of those exhaust valves. And I won't tell you in this form how many hours we typically put on our engines, on our leaseback airplanes. Nobody really needs to know that, but I'm anal about maintenance, and my partner on our airplanes was able to convince me over time that these engines can go longer if you take care of them. And also, and he became a quick believer too of the Electroair systems and how much better they are than traditional mags. And that was all mentioned by Mike in his presentation. Cleaner burns, better burns, smoother running engines. And I'm an old prop guy, and I know what vibration does to airplanes. I know it, not only the airframe, but avionics to the pilot. Vibration's a bad thing, and the more that we can reduce, the better off we are. Mike, unless you got anything else, I'll have Diana move.
Well, I was going to just piggyback on your comment about time. We just had a testimonial come through on a Piper Lance IO540 K1G5D. The operator, very high time engine. When the airplane was picked up, he put dual Electroair systems on it because he got rid of the dual Magneto, and was expecting to have to pull the engine for an engine overhaul. Put 400 hours on it over the last year, and the compression values improved. And the only modification he had done to the engine was the dual Electroair system. So it's anecdotal. I'm not going to promise you that your compression values are going to improve, but it did happen in this one case. If you go to our Facebook page, you'll see the actual email from the operator. Diana, I think we should probably go on to the next question.
Nope, that sounds good. All right. So what are the main advantages and disadvantages of the Electroair ignition system?
The advantages, that we could have 3 more webinars on it and talk about each one. The one that sticks out the most, and the one especially now with fuel prices increasing, fuel savings, and they're real. I mean, we have, with my own airplanes, we have looked at this time and time again and done numerous calculations. And keep in mind, my aircraft are being used. They're in an aero club, but for all intents and purposes, it's a 141.5 flight school. Most of our flights are training flights, and instructors these days don't really teach leaning techniques at all. So they're basically running, full rich all day long in whatever they're doing, touch and goes, cross countries, whatever they're doing. but we consistently see right at 1.1, 1.2 gallons an hour. And that fuel savings it's coming from doing more work with the fuel in the cylinder. It's not from leaning. Now, to do better, yeah, cruise, lean it out. We can, and we've fortunately got 3 more of these webinars to do. We can get into detail on some of that stuff. But the fuel savings are real. It's not a myth. It is for real. You're going to see better climb rates. In most cases, you're going to see better speeds. Keep in mind, some of these airplanes were built to be trucks, not speed demons. Like Mike talked about the Cessna 185, we don't expect to see that airplane pick up 12 knots of speed. We do expect it to climb much better and perform much better. We've had a couple of reports in the Bonanza world up to 12 knots. More typical in the Bonanza world's 5 to 7. We actually had a Navion that installed the system on an older Continental E225 that had very good data. They presented to us at Oshkosh. It did pick up 12 knots of speed. Pretty impressive. Smoother running engines. That, like I mentioned earlier, it's a big deal. And lead scavenging and cleaning, keeping the piston rings clean. All very important stuff. Is there a disadvantage? The only disadvantage really is, and Mike touched on this, when you get rid of the weakest link, being the Magnetos, and now we're going to a high performance ignition system, and we see it often, it will expose the next weakest link. And what I mean by that, induction leaks are common. Magnetos typically don't expose them. Our system will. The other big thing that we see is, especially on injected engines, fuel systems that aren't properly set up, injectors that need cleaning, things like that. It's irritating, I'm not going to lie, but we've gotten pretty good at it, and we can walk people through the steps. Once they explain to us what they're seeing. Another example is carburetors. 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to lean the carburetor out a little bit. You're going to have to dial the idle down a little bit when you put our systems on. That's really the only disadvantage is exposing problems with the airplane, problems with electrical systems. That's a real common one as well. These electrical systems are old, they're not real clean, and sometimes things have to be replaced to fix the problem. I know people don't like to hear that. One I've seen fairly commonly is starter relays. The starter relays are new to, I mean, they were new when the airplane was built, and they're still on the airplane. And what they're doing is they're drawing down too much voltage during the start, and it's kicking our system offline. And they're $100. You replace the thing, now the voltage isn't dropping like it was before. The system doesn't see that voltage drop, and it's gonna start like a car. I think unless you have something to add to that one, Mike, I think I covered that one.
Well, the only comment I would make would be every picture that you see in this particular slide has come off of the testimonial section on the Electroair website. And I would invite you, and with each of these pictures are comments from these operators. And I would really invite you to go to the Electroair website under the testimonial section and just scroll through and see what these operators have been saying about the operation of their aircraft after they've installed the Electroair system. And I think you'll find there's just nothing but advantages.
Diana, based on the clock that I'm looking at, it looks like we're about up against it.
Yep, we sure are. So what we're going to do right now, I just want to thank everybody for attending today and hanging out with us, especially for the Q&A. Thank you both to Mike and Darrell. That was really good. So we are going to have the link for the next webinar sign up is going to be on our sites at cessnaowner.org/webinars or piperowner.org/webinars. So please feel free to go sign up for the next one. We will be sending out a link to the recording tomorrow morning to your email, as well as a link to a survey where you can tell us what you thought of this webinar. Also, please mark down the contact information. We'll include their contact information in the email as well. But please, you can text, you can email, go to their website, go to their Facebook page, and check out all the things that they're talking about. Want to thank you guys. Thanks, Mike and Darrell. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Diana and Bill. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes. Thank you, Diana and Bill. We very much appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for listening to us.